The knock came at 9 p.m., a rhythmic, desperate pounding against the heavy oak door of the Whitefish Point life-saving station. When the lifesavers swung it open, they found a frozen, shivering wreck of a human, gasping for air, as if he had just crawled out of hell itself. Harry Stewart was the sole survivor of the Western Reserve, an invincible steel fortress ever to grace the Great Lakes. Yet, hours earlier, this titan had vanished into the icy throat of Lake Superior without a single distress call. As the storm howled outside, the men at the station realized the impossible. Their most advanced, state-of-the-art vessel had been dismantled by the very water it was built to conquer. Was this a freak encounter with a rogue wave? Or was it a fatal design flaw, silently waiting to snap the ship's spine? Join us as we descend into the dark, crushing silence of the lake bed to confront the truth. Stick with us until the very end. We are not just piecing together a century-old mystery. We are revealing why the secrets of the Western Reserve stayed buried for 132 years and uncovering the chilling lesson this tragedy still holds for our modern obsession with engineering perfection. To those who witnessed the Western Reserve slide down the slipway at the Cleveland Shipbuilding Company, she was far more than a mere freighter. She was the physical manifestation of the industrial fervor of the Gilded Age, sleek, fast, and seemingly indestructible. Yet, behind the polished steel plating and the impressive specifications of her triple expansion engine, the maritime industry was entering a period of profound uncertainty. The Western Reserve became the flagship of Minch's fleet, hauling iron ore with a speed that left older, wooden-hulled vessels in her wake. For Captain Peter G. Minch, these successes were the vindication of his philosophy. But beneath the surface-level success, there were whispers of unease among the seasoned captains who had spent their lives battling the Great Lakes. They understood something that the investors and the industrial titans often ignored. The lakes were not merely a waterway, they were a dynamic, violent force. The sheer length of these new steel hulls created massive longitudinal stresses that the older, shorter, wooden ships had never been forced to endure. The tragedy arrived in late August 1892, when Minch made the decision to transform a routine business, run a voyage from Cleveland to Two Harbors, Minnesota, to pick up a load of iron ore into a family affair. He invited his wife, Anna, their 10-year-old son, Charlie, their 7-year-old daughter, Florence, as well as his sister-in-law, Mrs. Jacob Delker Inglery, and her young daughter, Bertha, along with Captain Albert Myers, who brought his own young son, Carl. There were 6 passengers on board, accompanied by a crew of 21 souls. The voyage began under the idyllic warmth of a late summer sun, promising nothing but the blue serenity of Lake Erie and Lake Huron. But as they passed through the Sault Ste. Marie locks on the afternoon of the 30th of August 1892, the atmosphere shifted. A summer storm, unexpected and ferocious, began to rip across the surface of the lake. Captain Myers, a veteran master of the lakes, realized the danger of the developing conditions. With the ship carrying no cargo and no water ballast, she rode incredibly high in the water. Too high. She was essentially a light, hollow steel shell, vulnerable to the brutal, lashing energy of the waves. Myers made the prudent decision to drop anchor in the relative shelter of Whitefish Bay, hoping to ride out the worst of the fury. For hours, the Western Reserve sat in the bay, her steel hull groaning under the pressure of the rising wind. Yet, for a man like Minch, the ship was his masterpiece. He watched as the new vessel rode the swells, Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was an overestimation of the invincible steel. But early that evening, Myers made a decision that would haunt history. He weighed anchor and sailed out into the open lake. As they left the sanctuary of Whitefish Bay, the Western Reserve began to hammer into the open, churning seas of Superior. The ship lifted with every swell, only to drop into the dark, punishing troughs of the lake. It was a nauseating, bone-jarring sensation for the passengers huddled in their cabins. By 9 p.m., they were roughly 60 miles above Whitefish Point. The darkness was absolute, save for the white foam of the churning waves. Then, it happened. A sound that shouldn't exist in the middle of a storm, a deafening, metallic bang ripped through the ship's hull, followed by a horrific, sustained, grinding sound that defied all logic. Captain Myers, standing in the pilot house, whirled around in the darkness. What he saw was the impossible. The aft end of his ship was moving independently of the bow. The Western Reserve had failed. The pride of the fleet was snapping in two. In that singular moment, the arrogance of the 19th century Industrial Revolution collided with the raw, uncaring power of Lake Superior. The ship was no longer a vessel. She was a death trap. As the steel plates began to buckle and the rivets sheared off like bullets, Harry Stewart, a young wheelsman who had retired to his cabin in the bow, was jolted awake by the violent shuddering of the ship. He heard the sickening snap of a spar falling on deck. He sprinted out, only to find the deck itself severed just forward of the main mast. The ship was sinking beneath them, and the pride of Peter Minch had become a jagged, broken ruin, sinking slowly into the dark waters. As the Western Reserve finally slipped beneath the waves with a guttural, terrifying roar, she took with her the dreams of her owners, the lives of her passengers, and the false sense of security that had defined the dawn of the steel era. This was a structural collapse that exposed the fragility of the new age. As we look at the silence left behind, we have to ask ourselves, how many more ships would have to fall before the architects of the future finally learned to respect the weight of the water? The silence of the lake was only the beginning of the nightmare. The struggle for survival in the freezing, tossing waters was about to write a chapter in maritime history that would be doubted for over a century, until the technology of the modern age finally caught up to the truth of that dark night in 1892. The inland Greyhound was gone, but her ghost would haunt the deep for generations, waiting for the day when science would finally validate the story of the man who stood alone in the dark. The tragic dissolution of the Western Reserve is not merely a tale of a single ship lost to the depths. It is the central pivot of a broader, systemic failure that bound her inextricably to her sister vessel, the WH Gilcher. Long before the Western Reserve had even completed her early trials, lumber merchants William H. Gilcher, Randall E. Shuck, and Joseph C. Gilchrist, titans of the Great Lakes timber trade, watched Peter Minch's progress with keen interest. Convinced by the early potential of the inland Greyhound design, they commissioned an almost identical vessel. Construction on this project, known initially only as Hull No. 10, began in August 1890, the very same month the Western Reserve was launched. However, the launch of Hull No. 10 on the 18th of December 1890 was marked by an unsettling, chilling silence. As the vessel entered the water, there were no cheers, no popping champagne corks, and, most notably, no name. She slid into the harbor unnamed and unchristened, a practice that, among the deeply superstitious brotherhood of 19th century lake mariners, was widely regarded as a grave omen. To these sailors, a ship launched without a name at birth was a ship without a soul. the vessel condemned by the maritime gods to wander the volatile Great Lakes under a perpetual, invisible curse. She remained a nameless entity until March 1891, finally christened the WH Gilcher just over a month before entering service. Her maiden voyage on the 13th of May, 1891, signaled the dawn of a new era and quickly became the blueprints for the future of bulk shipping, delighting their owners with record-breaking performances. The Gilcher set a stunning mark for the largest cargo of wheat ever transported in a single trip, 113,885 bushels from Chicago to Buffalo, while the Western Reserve became the flagship of Minch's fleet, hauling iron ore with a speed that left older, wooden-hulled vessels in her wake. Yet, this success was a deceptive veneer masking fundamental structural flaws. Less than 2 months after the Western Reserve tragedy, on the 26th of October 1892, the WH Gilcher departed Buffalo, bound for Milwaukee with a full load of 3,080 tons of coal. Commanded by Captain Leeds H. Weeks with a crew of 18, the voyage initially proceeded smoothly. She passed through the Straits of Mackinac at approximately 2:30 p.m. on October 28, entering Lake Michigan. However, a ferocious storm was brewing. By 8 p.m., Captain Buchanan of the sailing ship Seaman observed a large steamer struggling against the gale 20 miles northwest of North Manitou Island. The steamer appeared unresponsive, showing no signs of life. As the storm raged, the Gilcher vanished. When the winds finally subsided, the grim reality of the era's design failure set in. Captain Dennis of the John Shaw reported large amounts of debris, including furniture and portions of a pilot house, drifting near South Manitou Island. Steamers White and Friant soon recovered wreckage confirmed to be from the WH Gilcher. By November 18, bodies wearing Gilcher life preservers were found on Fox Island, eventually brought to Traverse City in January 1893. When combined with the loss of the Western Reserve, a map of disaster emerged. These ships were not dying due to freak rogue waves. They were dying because the entire design paradigm, hastily constructed and fundamentally flawed, was unable to withstand the unforgiving, violent reality of the Great Lakes. For Harry Stewart, the night of the 30th of August 1892 began with the deceptive, almost soothing normalcy of a working man's earned rest. At 7 p.m., having completed a grueling shift amidst the mounting fury of an unseen enemy, Stewart retreated to his modest cabin in the bow of the Western Reserve. Outside, the storm was already beginning its howl, the massive steel freighter tossing and pitching with a violent, rhythmic intensity that would have unsettled a lesser mariner. But Stewart was a man of the lakes, forged by the unpredictable temperament of Superior. He possessed an intuitive, unshakable trust in the steel beneath his feet, believing firmly in the industrial invincibility of the vessel he served. He lay in his berth, the cacophonous roar of the gale effectively muffled by the immense, heavy bulk of the freighter, and closed his eyes, desperately hoping to steal a few hours of vital sleep. At 9 p.m., the world tilted into madness. Stewart was jolted awake by a sound that would remain seared into his memory, haunting his dreams for the remainder of his life. A singular, deafening, metallic bang, a sound of immense force, followed immediately by the terrifying, high-pitched screech of a spar breaking and slamming onto the deck. Before Stewart could even process the chaos or scramble from his berth, Captain Albert Myers threw open the cabin door. The captain's face was ashen, drained of all color, his eyes wide with the raw, unadulterated fear of a master who realized, in a heartbeat, that his ship was utterly lost. "Get out!" the captain commanded, his voice a jagged edge of urgency. "Get out as fast as you can. The ship is sinking." In those frantic, heartbeat-skipping moments, Stewart did not look back. He grabbed what meager clothing he could, sprinting with adrenaline-fueled intensity toward the port side, where the lifeboats were lashed. As he hurried across the slick, treacherous deck, he witnessed the impossible, a massive, gaping break in the deck plating, just forward of the main mast, where the steel had been sliced open like a wound. The main mast itself had collapsed, sprawling across the ruin of the deck like a felled giant. Stewart leaped over this jagged chasm of torn, twisted steel, his heart hammering against his ribs, until he reached the designated lifeboats. The night was absolute, a void of pitch black, the wind acting as a physical weight that pressed against his lungs, and the waves were massive, wall-like, black mountains of water that seemed intent on erasing the very existence of the freighter. According to Stewart's later harrowing testimony, there were two primary lifeboats on board, a larger, traditional wooden boat and a smaller metal craft. Captain Minch, his wife, their two young children, his sister-in-law, her daughter, Captain Myers, and Stewart himself, 17 souls in total, scrambled desperately into the larger wooden boat. The remaining 11 crewmen attempted to board the small, precarious metal craft. In a feat of desperate, flickering luck, both boats were successfully launched into the churning, hungry sea. But as they cleared the sinking Western Reserve, the smaller metal boat was almost instantly overwhelmed. The churning, freezing water swamped it, and the 11 men were cast into the dark, indifferent lake. The occupants of the wooden boat managed to pull 2 men from the icy water, including the ship's other wheelsmen, but the rest were swallowed by the dark. From their wooden vantage point, the survivors could do nothing but watch as the crippled freighter ground herself apart. Stewart would later recount the sound, a horrifying, guttural, metallic roar as the Western Reserve finally slipped beneath the surface, leaving nothing behind but a debris field and the suffocating, freezing spray of the storm. Then, the true, agonizing trial began. For the next 10 hours, the 19 people in the wooden boat were locked in a fight against nature itself. Stewart, driven by a primal, iron-willed instinct, joined the men who were desperately bailing water with their boots and hats. The waves, massive and unrelenting, required constant, coordinated effort to keep the boat from capsizing. They were essentially huddled together in the freezing dark, listening to the cries of the children and the desperate, fading prayers of the adults. Stewart would later recall periods of intense, violent wave action, followed by brief, mocking silences, a cycle of hope and despair that broke the spirit of many. By 7 a.m., the first gray light of morning began to touch the water, but the sea had not softened. A series of large, savage breakers slammed into the already exhausted survivors, lifting the boat into the air and capsizing it. Stewart plunged into the freezing water, disoriented, gasping, his lungs burning. When he finally broke the surface, the silence was the most terrifying part. He heard the desperate cries of his shipmates, men, women, and children, calling out for help in the darkness. But, as Stewart later testified in a statement that chills the soul, before long, the sounds faded away, and soon I was alone in the water. Miraculously, Stewart's hand brushed against an empty life preserver floating nearby. He clung to it, tying it around his numb, shaking body with the last remnants of his strength. He began to swim with a singular, crushing determination to live. When his feet finally touched the rock-strewn floor of the beach, he dragged himself onto the shore and collapsed, his body battered, his limbs numbed to the point of pain. As he lay there, the surf still lapping at his feet, he realized he was the only one left. The story of the Western Reserve lived only in him, driven by a survivor's guilt that would weigh heavier than the iron of the ship he had served on, Stewart forced himself to stand. He pushed through the pain, crawling when he could not walk, falling on his hands and knees, traversing 10 grueling miles of rugged shoreline. Finally, he reached the life-saving station at Whitefish Point. He dragged his frozen, broken body onto the porch and, with his last ounce of strength, knocked on the door. In the subsequent, exhaustive investigation, Stewart's testimony was intensely scrutinized by those who could not comprehend how a brand new, invincible ship could simply tear herself in two. Some doubted him, thinking the young man was delirious from the onset of hypothermia. But Stewart was precise. He spoke of the structural integrity that failed, of the ship breaking at the mast, and of the horrifying finality of the Western Reserve's dive. He had seen the truth in the dark, and he carried the weight of it until he collapsed into the arms of the rescuers. His survival was not just a medical miracle. It was a testament to the fact that while technology could fail, the human spirit, driven by the instinct to bear witness, is the only thing that can survive the silence of the lake. To fully grasp the tragedy of the Western Reserve and WH Gilcher, we must strip away the veneer of 19th century industrial pride and peer directly into the cold, unforgiving mechanics of her destruction. This vessel was the inevitable outcome of a design philosophy that had dominated the Great Lakes for nearly a century: the boxy hull freighter. By the 1890s, this architectural configuration was heralded as the absolute pinnacle of maritime efficiency. Picture, if you will, a massive, hollow steel box stretching roughly 300 feet in length, characterized by a utilitarian, uncompromising geometry. Her engine room, a dense, vibrating heart of coal-fired machinery, was slammed into the extreme stern, while a raised pilot house perched precariously far forward at the bow. This bookended configuration was not an aesthetic choice. It was a ruthless economic mandate. By concentrating the heavy machinery and the navigation deck at opposite extremities, designers maximized the central cargo hold, creating a floating warehouse capable of carrying record-breaking tonnage. It was a masterpiece of capitalism. Yet, this very configuration created a fundamental, potentially fatal structural vulnerability. Unlike modern naval architecture, where weight is distributed in a balanced, longitudinal harmony across the entire length of the hull, the traditional lake freighter placed the heaviest structural masses at the far ends, leaving a massive, empty expanse of cargo hold in the middle. This concentration of weight brings us to the terrifying, mechanical phenomenon known as hogging. Unlike the long, rhythmic, rolling swells of the open ocean, the Great Lakes are characterized by waves that are agonizingly short, incredibly steep, and remarkably frequent. When a 300-foot freighter encounters these seas, she is punished by them. Frequently, she would find herself perched atop a single massive wave crest, with her bow and stern suspended over the adjacent troughs. At this precise, perilous moment, the center of the ship is held aloft by the crest, while the heavy, dense machinery in the stern and the pilot house in the bow are left hanging in midair, unsupported by the water. The ship's own massive weight, combined with the lack of structural support in the empty hold, exerts a crushing downward force on the ends of the vessel. The hull is effectively forced to bend, like a bow being pulled back by a titan. If the steel used in her construction were ductile, possessing the metallic ability to flex, stretch, and return to form, the ship might have survived the cyclic stress. But if the steel were brittle, the ship would transform from a vessel into a rigid rod, snapping instantly over a knee. Structural design, however, is only half the story. We must also contend with the true killer, Lake Superior. Often dismissed by the uninitiated as mere inland water, mariners know the Great Lakes as inland oceans with a predatory temperament. Superior, the deepest of them all, functions as a thermodynamic engine of chaos. It is a realm defined by the Seiche effect, where atmospheric pressure causes water levels to oscillate violently and brutal nor'easters. In autumn, the temperature gap between the warm lake and Arctic air creates an energy imbalance that generates 80 miles per hour winds and steep, punishing waves. Because freshwater lacks the density of saltwater, it hammers a steel hull with even greater force. When the Western Reserve sailed into these conditions empty and without ballast, she wasn't riding the sea. She was dancing at the mercy of the wind. The era's fatal hubris was the assumption that steel was a magical panacea. In truth, 1890s metallurgy was in its infancy. The Bessemer process, while revolutionary, often produced steel with high levels of phosphorus and sulfur, making it pathologically brittle in sub-zero temperatures. On that fateful night, the Western Reserve's hull was essentially glass, susceptible to catastrophic fracture. As she crested the waves, the longitudinal stress on her frame exceeded the limits of her brittle plating and rivets. Every time she slammed into a trough, her spine was worked like a failing hinge until the steel simply gave up. This disaster serves as a sobering reminder of the hubris of innovation. We often view the past with superiority, believing we have mastered the risks that claimed our predecessors. Yet, the Western Reserve teaches us that every technological leap carries a hidden debt. The danger is rarely the environment. It is our arrogant belief that we have bypassed the laws of physics. The ghosts of the Western Reserve are more than victims of a storm. They are the warnings of a philosophy that valued profit over the unforgiving reality of the lake. The sinking of the Western Reserve was not merely a maritime disaster. It was the definitive catalyst for a fundamental reevaluation of the industrial age. As news of the catastrophe rippled across the Great Lakes, it shattered the burgeoning myth of steel's absolute superiority. The public, once enamored with the inland Greyhound, suddenly confronted a chilling reality. Their ships were not the invincible fortresses they had been promised. For 132 years, the truth remained buried in the dark, silent silt of Lake Superior. Skeptics frequently dismissed Harry Stewart's harrowing testimony as the delirious recount of a survivor suffering from acute hypothermia. They simply could not fathom a vessel of such caliber snapping in two. Meanwhile, the maritime industry slowly moved on. Bessemer steel was phased out in favor of more resilient alloys, longitudinal bracing was reinforced, and inspection standards became significantly more rigorous. Yet, the lake never forgets. In 2022, the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society launched a systematic grid search mission using the research vessel David Boyd. After 2 years of grueling sonar mapping, they stunned the world on the 10th of March, 2025. By announcing the discovery of the Western Reserve 600 feet below the surface off Whitefish Point. Underwater footage confirmed the ship had broken nearly straight in two, with the bow resting directly atop the stern, a sight that perfectly vindicated Stewart's testimony, proving his account was an unflinching, perfect record of the end. Furthermore, Stewart's testimony paved the way for serious allegations regarding brittle steel. This was a pioneering era for maritime metallurgy. The steel of the 1890s was not designed to handle the complex twisting and tensile stresses of the Great Lakes. Remarkably, the Western Reserve used the same type of steel as the Titanic, leading to similar historical inquiries into material failure. the industry-wide scandal that followed, compounded by the disappearance of the WH Gilcher, which was built at the same time using the same batches of steel, forced a permanent revolution in the types of steel approved for shipbuilding in both the United States and Canada. As we stand in the modern era, looking back at the broken remains of Peter Minch's flagship, we are forced to confront the enduring, uncomfortable parallels between the 1890s and our own time. The Western Reserve serves as a sobering reminder of the hubris of innovation. We often look back at our predecessors with a sense of modern technological superiority, assuming that our current understanding, our finite element analysis, our rigorous material testing, and satellite-backed forecasting has finally mastered the risks that claimed the freighters of old. Yet, the tragedy teaches us a cold, fundamental lesson. Every leap forward in technology carries a hidden, compounding debt. The danger is rarely the environment itself. It is our arrogant assumption that our newest inventions have allowed us to bypass the immutable laws of physics. Whether we are dealing with the brittle steel of the Gilded Age or the rapid, untested integration of artificial intelligence and autonomous navigation systems in our present day, the fatal error remains the same. The hubris of believing we have outsmarted the beast. The ghosts of the Western Reserve, the families, the crew, and the captain who chased a dream of speed into the dark are not just historical footnotes. They are the permanent, silent warnings of a design philosophy that valued temporary profit over the unforgiving reality of the environment. As the Western Reserve remains in her watery grave, she is no longer an inland Greyhound. She is a monument to the fact that when human ambition exceeds scientific humility, the lake will always, inevitably, demand the ultimate price. The question we must ask ourselves is not whether we have mastered the technology of our time, but whether we have finally learned to respect the forces that will always exist beyond our control. The silence of Lake Superior is not an invitation to conquer, but a warning to understand. Before we conclude today's message, thank you for bearing witness to the tragic story of the Western Reserve. If this analysis resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on our future deep dives. We truly value your perspective. If you have any thoughts on this maritime catastrophe or the human cost of industrial progress, please share them in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in our next exploration.